Sawyer woke to silence when he should have woken to screaming. The kind of silence that came after something terrible had already happened. He sat up in the dark, heart hammering against his ribs, and reached for the rifle beside his bed. The air tasted wrong. Smoke and wet earth and something else he couldn't name. Through the window, the first gray light showed him what shouldn't be possible. His corral fence still standing, his barn door closed. His water trough exactly where it had been the night before. Everything looked untouched, but the ground around his cabin was scorched black in a perfect circle, stopping 3 feet from his walls. And standing at the edge of that circle, her back to him, was a woman he had never seen before. Sawyer had built this ranch 2 years ago after losing everything once already. He chose this isolated stretch of land because no one came here. No one asked questions, and no one expected anything from him except the work his hands could do. The woman shouldn't exist. No one knew where he lived. No one cared. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside, rifle loose in his grip but ready. The woman didn't turn. She stood perfectly still, staring at something in her hands. The burned ground crunched under his feet like broken glass. Up close, he could see she wore a simple dress the color of dust. Her long black hair braided tight down her back. Small stones hung from a cord around her neck. Her hands were strewn with ash and something darker. "Who are you?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. She turned slowly, and her eyes locked onto his without hesitation. Dark eyes that looked through him rather than at him. She didn't answer. Instead, she held out her hands, palms up. In them lay a cloth bundle, carefully wrapped. The fabric was singed at the edges. "You need to leave." Sawyer kept the rifle pointed at the ground, but his finger stayed near the trigger. "Now you owe me more than sending me away." Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the morning air like something sharp. She had an accent he couldn't place. Words shaped differently than his. "I don't owe you anything. I don't even know you." She gestured at the burned earth, then at his cabin, his barn, his animals standing calm in the corral. "You should be dead. Your ranch should be ash. It would be if I hadn't been here." Sawyer felt cold spread through his chest. "What are you talking about?" "Someone tried to burn you out last night." She stepped closer, and he instinctively raised the rifle an inch. She didn't stop. "They soaked the ground with oil. They were going to light it while you slept." "That's not possible." "I would have heard." "You didn't hear because I made sure you didn't wake until it was over." She was close enough now that he could see the exhaustion in her face. The soot smeared across her cheekbone. The way her hands trembled slightly despite her steady voice. "I stopped them. I put out the fire before it reached your walls. I made them leave." "Who? Who tried to burn me out?" She didn't answer. Instead, she unwrapped the cloth bundle in her hands. Inside was a piece of charred wood with marks carved into it, symbols he didn't recognize. His stomach dropped. "Why? Would you help me?" His voice came out barely above a whisper. "I don't know you. You don't know me." That's not entirely true. Something flickered in her eyes. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. Like she knew something about him he didn't know about himself. "My name is Kona, and you're right. You don't owe me gold." Sawyer lowered the rifle completely, too confused to keep pretending it made him feel safer. "Then, what do you want?" Kiona looked past him at the cabin, at the land he'd built with his own hands, at the life he'd carved out of nothing. When her eyes came back to his, they held something that made his breath catch. Not threat, but certainty. "I want you to listen when I tell you that what happened last night wasn't random. They'll come back, and next time I might not be here to stop them." Before Sawyer could respond, before he could demand real answers instead of riddles, Kiona turned and walked away from him. Not toward the road, but toward the ridge beyond his property line. The direction no one ever came from. The direction that led deeper into territory people avoided for reasons they didn't like to discuss. "Wait," he called after her. "You can't just tell me someone tried to kill me and then leave." "Who were they? How did you know? Why were you even here?" She stopped at the edge of his land, but didn't turn around because I was looking for you, Sawyer Briggs. and I found you exactly when you needed to be found. She disappeared over the ridge before he could ask how she knew his name. Sawyer stood frozen for 3 full minutes. After Kiona disappeared over the ridge, his mind kept circling back to impossible questions with no answers. He looked down at the charred wood still in his hand, at the symbols carved deep into the surface. Not magic, just marks. Someone had taken time to carve these before trying to burn him alive. He went to check his animals first. The horses were calm, too calm for having been near a fire. He ran his hands along their flanks, checking for burns or signs of panic. Nothing. His 2 cows stood chewing quietly. The chicken scratched at the dirt like it was any other morning. Whatever Kiona had done last night, she'd done it without disturbing anything except the ground itself. The scorched earth formed a perfect ring around his property. Sawyer walked the entire perimeter, studying it. The fire had been controlled, deliberate. Someone had poured accelerant in a circle, probably planning to light it from multiple points at once. The cabin would have gone up like dry kindling. He would have died in his sleep, never knowing who or why. But Kiona had stopped it. Somehow, Sawyer went back inside and made coffee with shaking hands. The rifle stayed within reach on the table. He couldn't stop thinking about her eyes when she looked at him, not hostile, but knowing. Like she could see through all the walls he'd built around himself since coming here. He was still sitting there an hour later when he heard footsteps outside. His hand went to the rifle, but it was just Porter Dale, the man who owned the land 3 miles east. Porter rode up on a gray mare, his weathered face creased with concern. "Saw smoke from my place last night," Porter said without dismounting. "You all right?" Sawyer stepped outside, acutely aware of the burned ground surrounding his cabin. There was no hiding it. "Had some trouble. It's handled." Porter's eyes swept over the scorched earth, and his expression darkened. "That's not an accident, Sawyer. Someone tried to run you off." He paused, then added carefully, "Or worse, I know you. Report this, get someone to look at it." "No." Sawyer crossed his arms. "And I'm not going to." Porter studied him for a long moment. "That's your choice. But people around here have been asking questions about you. Where you came from, why you keep to yourself. Some folks don't like mysteries. I'm not bothering anyone. I know that. I'm just telling you what I hear." Porter shifted in his saddle. There's also been talk about an Apache woman spotted near the eastern ridge. Young woman traveling alone. That mean anything to you? Sawyer kept his face neutral. Should it? Folks are nervous. They see an Apache woman wandering around. They start thinking about property lines and old disputes. They start remembering things they'd rather forget. Porter leaned forward. "If she's on your land, you might want to send her. On her way for her sake as much as yours. She's not on my land." But she was. It wasn't a question. Porter had seen something in Sawyer's expression. "Listen, I'm not here to judge. You helped me fix my well last month when I needed it. I'm returning the favor now. Whatever happened here last night, it's going to draw attention you don't want. And if people connect you with that Apache woman, it'll get worse before it gets better." Sawyer said nothing. Porter waited, then sighed and turned his horse. "Suit yourself, but watch your back, Sawyer. Someone already tried once. They'll try again." Porter started to ride off, then stopped. "One more thing. Those marks on that burned wood. I've seen those before. 3 years back when the Hendricks place burned down. Same symbols. They never found who did it." He rode away before Sawyer could respond, leaving him standing in the circle of scorched earth with more questions than before and the terrible certainty that Kiona had been right about one thing. Whoever tried to kill him last night wasn't finished. Sawyer spent the afternoon trying to work, but his mind wouldn't settle. He repaired a section of fence near the corral, but his eyes kept drifting to the eastern ridge where Kiona had disappeared. Porter's words echoed in his head. The Hendricks place, same symbols. That family had died in there. Sleep 3 years ago. The whole town had mourned them, but no one had ever been arrested. By evening, he made a decision. He saddled his horse and rode toward the ridge. He told himself he was going to demand real answers, not riddles. But Part of him knew the truth. He needed to warn her. If people were already talking, if they connected her to him, she'd be in danger. He found her near a cluster of rocks, where a thin stream cut through the land. She had a small fire going, and she was tending to burns on her hands with some kind of paste made from crushed plants. She looked up when she heard his horse, but didn't seem surprised. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Sawyer dismounted. "People know about you. They're asking questions. Let them ask. You don't understand. A man came by today. He told me about another ranch that burned 3 years ago. Same symbols as the ones you showed me. That whole family died." He stepped closer to the fire. Was it the same people? Did they kill the Hendricks family? Kiona's jaw tightened. She looked down at her burned palms. "Yes." "How do you know?" "Because I tried to stop them that time, too. But I was too late." Her voice went quiet, almost hollow. "I was 16. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't understand how fast fire could spread in a place like that. How little time there would be. By the time I reached their cabin, the whole thing was burning. I could hear them screaming inside." Sawyer felt something cold settle in his chest. "You tried to save them." "I tried. I failed." She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw real pain in her eyes. "I've been tracking these men ever since, following the patterns, the symbols they leave. They've burned 4 ranches in 3 years. Your place would have been the 5th. Why? Why are they doing this? Because they want the land. They burn people out, make it look random or like accidents, then buy the property for nothing when families are desperate to leave." Kiona wrapped her hands carefully. "Your land sits on water. Good. Water that runs year-round. Someone wants it badly enough to kill for it." Sawyer crouched down across from her. "You've been hunting them for 3 years?" "Yes. Alone. My people are gone, scattered or dead. I have no one else." She met his eyes directly. "I couldn't save the Hendricks family, but I could save you. So I did." He studied her face. In the firelight, the exhaustion there, the determination, the scars on her hands that weren't all from last night. "You didn't have to risk yourself for a stranger. You're not a stranger." "Not really." Something flickered in her expression. 3 years ago, after the Hendricks fire, someone left food near where I was hiding. Good food, not scraps. They left it there for 3 nights in a row, then stopped. I never saw who did it, but I found a piece of paper with the food on the 3rd night. It had a name written on it. Your name? Sawyer's breath caught. He remembered. 3 years ago, before he'd built this ranch, back when he'd been working for Porterdale, he'd seen someone moving in the hills, someone who looked hurt and afraid. He'd left food, but he'd never approached, never demanded thanks or explanations. That was you, he said quietly. That was me. You helped me when I had nothing, when I was ready to give up. Kiona's voice stayed steady, but her eyes were fierce. So when I discovered they were targeting you next, I came. That's why you owe me nothing. Sawyer Briggs. I was repaying a debt, not creating one. Before he could respond, they both heard it. Horses approaching. Fussed. Multiple riders coming from the direction of his ranch. Kiona moved. Fussed. She kicked dirt over the fire and grabbed a small pack Sawyer hadn't noticed before. How many riders? He listened. 3, maybe 4. We need to move now. She was already heading away, from the sound of hooves toward rougher terrain where horses would struggle. Wait. Sawyer caught her arm. This is my land. I'm not running from anyone. Then you'll die on your land. Is that what you want? Her eyes were hard. These aren't men who ask questions first. I don't care. I'm done running from things. He pulled his arm free and turned back toward the approaching riders. I ran once before, lost everything anyway. This time I face it. Kiona stared at him for a long moment, then cursed under her breath in a language he didn't understand. You're a fool. Probably. He checked his rifle. But I'm a fool who's tired of being afraid. The riders came into view. 4 men on horseback carrying rifles and torches. Sawyer recognized 2 of them from town, Clyde Hargrove and his younger brother Wade. The other 2 were strangers, hard-faced men who looked like they'd done violent work before. Clyde pulled his horse to a stop 20 feet away. He was a thick man with a gray beard and cold eyes. Sawyer Briggs heard. You had some trouble at your place last night. News travels fast. It does win. Smoke can be seen for miles. Clyde's gaze shifted past Sawyer to where Kiona stood half hidden in shadow. That the Apache woman people have been talking about. She's not your concern. See, that's where you're wrong. Clyde leaned forward in his saddle. She's been trespassing on private land, stealing, maybe starting fires. She didn't start anything. She stopped a fire at my ranch. WD laughed. A harsh sound. That's convenient. She starts a fire, puts it out, plays hero. Classic scheme to gain trust. It wasn't like that then. How was it? Clyde's voice went quiet. Dangerous because from where I sit, you've got an Apache woman on your land the same night someone tries to burn you out. That's not coincidence. Sawyer felt. Kiona tensed behind him. He kept his rifle pointed down, but his fingers stayed near the trigger. You've got this. Wrong. I don't think we do. One of the strangers spoke now, a lean man with a scar across his jaw. We've been tracking this woman for weeks. She's been spotted near every ranch. That's had trouble. Every single one. The pieces clicked into place in Sawyer's mind. They were setting her up, painting her as the arsonist so no one would look deeper. So no one would ask who really benefited from families being burned out of their homes. You're the ones who tried to kill me, Sawyer said flatly. You're the ones who burned the Hendricks family alive. The temperature in the clearing seemed to drop. Clyde's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. You want my land because of the water. You've been burning people out so you can buy their property for nothing. Sawyer raised his rifle slightly. Kiona knows. She's been tracking you for 3 years. Is that so? Clyde looked at Kiona with new interest. Then she's even more dangerous than we thought. Wade pulled a torch from his saddle and struck a match. The flame caught, illuminating his grin. Shame she's going to die in the same fire that killed you both. Another tragic accident. Another mystery no one will solve. The 4 men spread out in a loose semicircle, cutting off escape routes. Sawyer's heart hammered, but he kept his voice steady. You won't get away with this. We've gotten away with it 4 times already. Clyde drew his rifle. What makes you think tonight will be different? Kiona stepped forward, moving to stand beside Sawyer rather than behind him. Her hands were empty, but she stood like someone who knew how to fight. Because this time, you're not burning people in. They're asleep. This time we're ready. Clyde smiled. Ready to die? Maybe. He raised his rifle, and everything happened at once. Sawyer fired first. His shot went high deliberately, a warning that shattered the night and sent the horses rearing. Kiona moved at the same moment, diving toward the rocks while WD's torch arced through the air toward the dry brush. Sawyer rolled left as 3 rifles opened fire, bullets tearing through the space where he'd been standing. The torch hit the ground and caught immediately. Flames spread fast across the dry grass. Sawyer scrambled behind a boulder, his heart slamming against his ribs. He could hear Clyde shouting orders, boots hitting the ground as the men dismounted. A hand grabbed his shoulder and he spun, rifle raised, but it was Kiona. She pressed something into his palm, a small leather pouch. When I say run, throw this into the fire. What is it? Ground minerals. It'll make smoke, thick smoke. We use the cover to get to your horse. She didn't wait for agreement. Run now. Sawyer threw the pouch into the flames. It hit with a soft pop and thick white smoke billowed up, spreading fast. And, lo, the wind carried it toward the man. He heard coughing, cursing. Kiona grabbed his hand and pulled him toward where he tied his horse. They made it 10 steps before Wade appeared through the smoke, swinging a piece of burning wood like a club. Sawyer barely got his rifle up in time. The wood connected with the barrel, sending the rifle spinning from his hands. Wade swung again, and Sawyer stepped inside the arc, driving his shoulder into WD's chest. They went down hard. Kiona's boot caught Wade in the ribs before he could recover. She hauled Sawyer to his feet. Move. They reached the horse. Sawyer grabbed the reins and swung into the saddle, then reached down for Kiona. She took his hand, and he pulled her up behind him. Her arms wrapped around his waist as he kicked the horse into a gallop. Shots rang out behind them. One bullet buzzed past Sawyer's ear like an angry insect. The horse stretched into a full run, hooves pounding across the rough ground. Kiona held tight, her breath hot against his shoulder blade. They rode hard for 20 minutes before Sawyer finally slowed. His hands were shaking. Behind them, he could see the orange glow of fire spreading across the ridge. They'd burned the whole area to cover their tracks. Your ranch, Kiona said quietly. We need to check it. They wouldn't. But even as he said it, Sawyer knew they would. If Clyde and his men couldn't kill them tonight, they'd destroy everything Sawyer had built. Sent a message. They approached his property from the east, moving slow and quiet. Smoke rose from his cabin before they even crested the hill. Sawyer's chest went tight. Everything he'd worked for 2 years of his life. The cabin was burning, not as fast as it would have if they'd used accelerant, but the flames had caught the dry wood of the roof. His barn door hung open. The animals were gone, either run off or stolen. The corral fence had been torn down in places. Sawyer sat frozen on his horse, staring at the destruction. He'd known this might happen. He'd chosen to face them anyway, but seeing it, watching the flames consume the life he'd built from nothing, felt like something vital was being carved out of his chest. I'm sorry. Kiona's voice was barely audible. This is my fault. If I hadn't come here, if I hadn't involved you. No. Sawyer turned to look at her. Her face was strewn with soot, and her eyes held guilt that didn't belong there. You saved my life. You tried to warn me. This isn't on you, but your ranch can be rebuilt. He looked back at the burning cabin. You know what can't be rebuilt? Me. If I'd burned to death in my sleep last night. The Hendricks family, all the others. He turned his horse away from the flames. You saved my ranch once. Now it's gone anyway. But I'm alive because of you. They rode in silence for a while. Finally, Kiona spoke again. Where will you go? Sawyer didn't answer immediately. He thought about Porter Dale's warning about running again, starting over somewhere new where no one knew his name. Then he thought about Kona tracking murderers for 3 years, alone and relentless, trying to stop them from killing anyone else. I'm going wherever you're going, he said. We finish this together. Kiona's arms tightened around his waist. They'll come after us. Both of us now. Let them come. Sawyer's jaw set. I'm done running, and you've been fighting alone long enough. Dawn was breaking when they finally stopped to rest. And that's when Kiona told him the one thing that changed everything. She knew where Clyde and his men were hiding the deeds to all the land they'd stolen. They found shelter in an abandoned mining cave. As the sun climbed higher, Sawyer's horse was exhausted. Sides heaving, Kiona slid down first and checked the cave entrance, while Sawyer secured the horse deeper inside where it couldn't be seen from the trail. The cave was dry and went back far enough to hide them, but not so deep they'd be trapped. Sawyer sat heavily on a flat rock, suddenly aware of how bone-tired he was. He hadn't slept in over a day, his hands still shook from adrenaline. Kiona sat across from him, pulling her braid over her shoulder to check it for burns. A few strands at the end were singed. She worked them loose with her fingers, methodical and calm despite everything that had happened. The deeds, Sawyer said. Where are they? Clyde has a house. In town, two-story, painted white on the north end near the livery stable. He keeps them in a safe in his office on the 2nd floor. She looked up at him. I've watched the place for weeks. He goes there every few days to add more documents, property records, bills of sale, all forged. You're sure they're there? I saw him carry them in myself, watched through the window as he locked them away. Her jaw tightened. He was laughing, counting money while people's lives burned. Sawyer rubbed his face. We can't just walk into his house and take them. He'll have guards, or he'll be there himself. No. Kiona leaned back against the cave wall. But if we can get those documents, we can prove what he's done. Show the authorities who really burned those ranches. The authorities? Sawyer laughed bitterly. Half of them are probably in his pocket. That's how men like Clyde operate. Then we show everyone. Make it public. Bring the documents to the newspaper, to Porter Dale, to anyone who will listen. She met his eyes. Even corrupt men can ignore evidence when enough people know about it. Sawyer wanted to believe her, but he'd learned the hard way that justice didn't always work the way it should. And if that doesn't work, then we burn them. Keona's voice went flat. Burn the deeds, burn the forged records, burn everything. Without those documents, he can't claim ownership. The families can fight back. They sat in silence for a while. Through the cave mouth, Sawyer could see the sky turning that particular blue. That mid-afternoon was settling in. Somewhere out there, Clyde and his men were hunting them. Somewhere, his ranch was still smoldering. "I'm sorry about your home," Keona said quietly. "You built something good there. I could see it in the way you cared for your animals, the way you'd repaired every fence post. You put your whole heart into that place. It was just wood and nails." "No, it wasn't." She studied his face. "It was the life you were trying to build. The proof you could start over and make something that mattered." Sawyer looked at her. Surprised, she understood. "How did you know?" "Because I recognized the look. I've been trying to do the same thing for 3 years, trying to build something meaningful out of loss." She wrapped her arms around her knees. "My family is scattered. My home is gone. All I have left is this. Stopping men like Clyde, making sure no one else loses what I lost. That's a heavy burden to carry alone." "I know." Her eyes met his, and something passed between them. Not pity, but recognition. Two people who'd both lost everything and were trying to build meaning from the wreckage. "But maybe I'm not alone anymore." Sawyer felt his breath catch. She was close enough that he could see the small scar above her eyebrow. The way her lips were, chapped from days in the sun and smoke. Close enough that he could smell the ash in her hair mixed with something else. Something that reminded him of the wild plants that grew near water. "Kona," started, not sure what he was going to say. She leaned forward, and for a moment he thought she might kiss him, but instead she reached out and took his hand, holding it between both of hers. Her palms were rough and warm. "Thank you," she said, "for not sending me away, for believing me when no one else would, for choosing to fight when you could have run." Sawyer squeezed her hand gently. "You saved my life. You saved my ranch even. If it's gone now, I owe you more than I can repay." Her eyes searched his face. "You don't owe me anything." "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." Outside, the sun was beginning its descent. They had maybe 3 hours before dark. 3 hours to plan how two people, with nothing left, could take down men who had everything. They entered town after dark, moving slow and careful. Sawyer had pulled his hat low, and Keona had wrapped a shawl around her head and shoulders, making her less recognizable. The streets were quiet. Most people had gone home for the evening. Clyde's house stood exactly where Keona had described it. 2 stories painted white with lamp light glowing in the upper windows. Sawyer could see shadows moving inside. At least 2 people, maybe more. "There's a back entrance," Keona whispered. "The door to the kitchen. It has a weak lock." They circled around through an alley. The back of the house faced a narrow yard with a small stable. No horses inside, which meant Clyde's men were either out searching or had left their mounts elsewhere. Sawyer tried not to think about the odds they were facing. Keona produced a thin piece of metal from somewhere in her clothing and worked it into the lock. Sawyer kept watch, his hand on his rifle. Every sound seemed too loud, his heartbeat, her breathing, the soft click when the lock finally gave. The kitchen was dark and smelled of old coffee and tobacco. They moved through it carefully, avoiding the table and chairs. Voices drifted down from upstairs. Male voices, arguing about something. The stairs were the dangerous part. Old wood that would creak under their weight. Keona went first, testing each step before putting her full weight down. Sawyer followed, wincing every time the wood groaned softly beneath his boots. The second-floor hallway was narrow. 3 doors, all closed. The voices came from the one at the far end. Keona pointed to the middle door and mouthed the word "office." She tried the handle. Locked. She pulled out her piece of metal again, but Sawyer caught her wrist and shook his head. Too much time. Too much noise. Instead, he put his shoulder to the door and threw his weight against it. The lock splintered with a crack that sounded like thunder in the quiet house. Go! Sawyer shoved Kiona into the office as the voices upstairs cut off. Footsteps pounded toward them. Kiona ran to the desk where a small iron safe sat bolted to the floor. She dropped to her knees and started working the dial. Sawyer positioned himself in the doorway, rifle raised. Wade appeared at the end of the hall, gun drawn. His eyes widened when he saw Sawyer. "You're supposed to be dead." Disappointed, Sawyer fired. The shot went wide, deliberately close, enough to make Wade dive back around the corner. Return fire splintered the door frame next to Sawyer's head. "Hurry," called back to Kiona. "I'm trying." Her hands were steady on the dial despite the gunfire. "It's a 4-number combination. I've watched him open it twice, but I couldn't see all the numbers." More footsteps. Clyde's voice roaring orders. Wade fired again, keeping Sawyer pinned. Sawyer returned. "Fire. Try and make every shot count." He had maybe 10 rounds left. "Got it." Kiona pulled the safe door open. Inside were stacks of papers, deeds, forged documents, all the proof they needed. She started shoving them into her pack. A bullet punched through the wall 6 in from Sawyer's head, showering him with splinters. Wade was getting braver, moving closer. Sawyer could hear others coming up the stairs behind him. They were about to be surrounded. "We need to go now." "Almost done." Kiona grabbed the last stack of papers. Clyde appeared. Behind Wade, his face twisted with rage. "You burned my house down for this." "4 papers? These papers are proof you're a murderer." Sawyer said. "Proof you burned. Family's alive for profit. No one will believe you. I own this town. Maybe, but they'll believe these documents." Sawyer gestured with his rifle. "Now back off. We're leaving." Clyde smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Sawyer had ever seen. "You're not going anywhere." The window behind Kiona exploded inward. Glass showered everywhere as someone fired from outside. Kiona threw herself flat. Sawyer spun, trying to cover both directions at once. They were trapped. No way forward. No way back. Kiona met his eyes across the office. Her face was determined, fierce, but he could see the fear underneath. She'd spent 3 years hunting these men. She'd risked everything to stop them, and now it looked like they'd both die here, surrounded with the evidence they needed, but no way to use it. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have come up with a better plan." Sawyer looked at her, at this woman who'd saved his life, who'd fought alone for 3 years, who deserved so much better than dying in some killer's house. And he made a decision. "Go," he said. "Take the documents. Get out. Through the window. I'll hold them here." "No, I'm not leaving you. You have to." He turned back to the hallway, firing twice to keep Wade back. Someone needs to survive this. Someone needs to make sure those papers reach people who will do something with them. "That someone is you, Sawyer. You saved my ranch," he said. "Now I owe you more than gold, Kiona. I owe you justice. I owe you a chance to finish what you started. So take it, please." Their eyes met one last time, and then she was moving. Kiona hesitated only a second before climbing through the shattered window. Sawyer heard her boots hit the ground outside, heard her running. Good. She was safe. The documents were safe. Now he just had to survive long enough to see what she did with them. Sawyer fired 3 more shots down the hallway, then turned and dove through the window after Kiona. He hit the ground hard, rolling, to absorb the impact. Glass cut through his shirt, but he was up and running before Clyde's men could get to the window. Kiona was waiting at the corner of the house with his horse. "You fool. You beautiful fool." They rode hard through the dark streets. Behind them, Sawyer could hear shouting, could hear horses being saddled, but they had a head start, and Sawyer knew these trails better than he'd admitted. He led them through narrow paths and across a shallow creek that would hide their tracks. They didn't stop until they reached Porter's ranch an hour later. Sawyer pounded on the door until Porter appeared, rifle in hand and suspicion on his face. "I need your help," Sawyer said, "and I need you to listen before you decide." Porter looked from Sawyer to Kiona, then at the pack she carried. "Come inside." They laid everything out on Porter's kitchen table. deeds to 5 ranches, all signed over to Clyde Harrow for prices far below their worth. Dates that match the fires. Forged signatures from men who died in those fires and written notes in Clyde's own hand detailing payments to Wade and the other men for their work. Porter read through the documents slowly, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finished, he looked up at Sawyer. "This is enough to hang them all. If the authorities will listen." Keona said, "They'll listen." Porter stood and walked to his desk, pulling out paper and ink. "I'm writing to the territorial marshal tonight. I'll ride to the telegraph office at first light, and I'll make copies of these documents and send them to 3 different newspapers." He looked at them both. Men like Clyde get away with murder because good people stay quiet. Not this time. 3 days later, the territorial marshal arrived with 6 deputies. They arrested Clyde Hargrove, his brother Wade, and the 2 men who'd helped them. The trial lasted a week. Porter testified. The documents spoke for themselves. All 4 men were sentenced to hang for murder and arson. Sawyer stood in the courtroom when the verdict was read and felt something in his chest finally loosen. Justice. Real justice. Because Keona hadn't given up for 3 years. Because she'd saved him when she could have run. Because she'd fought when no one else would. After the trial, Porter offered Sawyer work. Rebuilding his ranch. "You've got good hands and a strong back. And I figure I owe you for bringing those murderers to justice." But Sawyer had other plans. He found Keona standing at the edge of town, looking out toward the eastern ridge where her people used to live. "I'm going to rebuild," he told her. "Find a new piece of land. Start over. Build something that lasts." He paused, then added quietly, "But I don't want to do it alone." Keona turned to look at him. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if you want to stop running, stop tracking, stop fighting alone." He stepped closer. "I'm asking if you want to build something with me. A ranch, a home, a life." She studied his face for a long moment. "You saved my ranch," she said softly, echoing his words from the office. "Now I owe you more than gold, Sawyer Briggs." "You don't owe me anything." "Yes," she said, her lips curving into the first real smile he'd seen from her. "I do." She took his hand, and they walked together toward the sunset, toward whatever came next. 2 people who'd lost everything and found something better in each other. Not because they were running from the past, but because they'd chosen to face it together in one. 6 months later, their ranch stood on new land near good water. The house was small but solid, built with both their hands.